I thought decades of marriage guaranteed trust. I thought love could withstand time. But after 30 years, one hidden betrayal proved that even the oldest bonds can shatter.
George Hamilton had spent nearly 60 years of life doing what he believed was right. At 75, he considered himself fortunate. He had a career he loved, a home in a quiet suburban town in Michigan, and a spouse, Lillian Hamilton, whom he had married 30 years ago. Their life was comfortable, predictable, and quiet, the kind of life people envied because it seemed free of drama. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, George felt a subtle distance forming over the years. Lillian had always been private, even secretive, but George had never imagined the truth she kept could change everything. It began innocently. George was helping Lillian clean out the attic, organizing old boxes and mementos. Among the stacks, he found a small envelope with the initials, RM, written in delicate script. Curious, he opened it. Inside were letters, some yellowed with age, some surprisingly recent. They weren't love letters in a typical sense, but they contained emotional confessions, detailed accounts of conversations, and intimate notes addressed to someone named Richard Monroe, a man George had never heard of. George felt a cold shock. He dropped the letters, and the past decades flashed in his mind: late nights at the office, Lillian's occasional disappearances, sudden phone calls she refused to explain. He had trusted her completely, believing that their decades of marriage were built on honesty. Now, doubt crept in. He didn't confront her immediately. For a week, George watched quietly. Lillian's behavior didn't change. She continued cooking dinner, attending church, tending her garden, but something in her eyes flickered with unease. George's mind, once calm, became restless. Every small interaction now felt like a test of loyalty, every word she spoke a puzzle. Finally, he confronted her one evening while the sun set over their backyard. He held the letters in his trembling hands. Lillian's face went pale, and she took a deep breath, almost as if she had been waiting for this day. "It's true," she admitted quietly. "It happened a long time ago, before we even married." George's initial anger softened slightly. The revelation was decades old. But then Lillian continued. "I never stopped writing to him for years afterward," she confessed, tears forming in her eyes. "Not because I wanted to leave you, but because I didn't know how to stop." George felt the weight of betrayal settle heavily on his chest. The man she had been writing to, Richard Monroe, was a colleague from her past life, someone she had leaned on emotionally during lonely times. It was not a physical affair, but the secrecy and the prolonged emotional connection made George's heart ache in ways he hadn't expected. For days, silence ruled their home. George walked through his daily routines mechanically, his mind replaying every interaction with Lillian over 30 years. He remembered moments when he thought she was distant, times when he had suspected nothing. Now, all of it seemed tainted by doubt. Eventually, George sought counsel from someone outside the marriage, a close friend who had also experienced betrayal. He needed perspective, not vengeance. The friend reminded him that emotional betrayal could be as damaging as physical, especially when it was hidden for decades. George realized that confronting Lillian wasn't just about anger, it was about understanding why. He returned home and asked her to explain fully, to be honest without holding back. Lillian recounted her past loneliness, her fears of losing George before their relationship even began, and how writing to Richard had become a secret refuge she didn't know how to abandon. George listened, and for the first time in years, they spoke without pretense. The conversation was painful, exhausting, and full of tears, but it was honest. George realized that the love he had felt for decades wasn't destroyed, it had been overshadowed by secrecy. In the weeks that followed, George and Lillian sought counseling, individually and together. They needed guidance to rebuild trust and navigate the fragile reality of their marriage. Friends and neighbors noticed the change, but few could understand the depth of the pain hidden behind their calm demeanor. George also learned something vital: forgiveness doesn't erase betrayal, but it allows life to move forward. He could not ignore the past, but he could acknowledge it without letting it dominate the future. Slowly, Lillian regained his trust. She no longer hid letters or memories, she shared openly, allowing George to be part of her past, not just her present. George, in turn, allowed himself to feel hurt without letting bitterness consume him. Months later, George reflected on the revelation. He realized that life was far more complicated than loyalty alone. Emotional bonds could form in secret, intentions could be misunderstood, and trust could be fragile even after decades. But he also learned that even late in life, honesty had the power to heal. Their marriage, once built on comfort and routine, was now rebuilt on transparency, understanding, and acceptance of imperfection. The secret that had threatened to destroy them ultimately became the catalyst for a stronger bond, a reminder that love isn't just surviving, it's enduring, even through the hardest truths. George understood one undeniable fact: in marriage, it's not just the years together that matter, but the courage to face the truth, no matter how late it arrives.